Can you hear me in the back? This thing is supposed to be a microphone. Is that right?
Yeah, it is.
Well, I don't know. When Oscar asked us to do this, I always have a little bit of concern, particularly on this. I hate getting up here anyway because I'm always afraid I'll put my foot in it. But this particular time, when you address something this magnitude of abstraction, you know that somebody's going to go away and say, Will Spradlin's a dumb mystic. You know, he's a metaphysician. That joker doesn't believe in anything anymore. I'm going to hear a lot of wisecracks when I get back to the department about this. I dread seeing all the folks that came from there to make me live with it. But I'm so overwhelmed and pleased with your critique that I think it was worth it. I'll take the ridicule when I get back. The thing that's fascinated me in tracing the history of conceptual frames is, as we've collected ideas, as we've collected more and more data, either by direct observation, or by the evolution of technology, we've had to have packages to put it in, buckets, conceptual frames, if you like that fancy term better. And they slowly evolve. And I can remember, I kind of like the anthropomorphic frame, when you make everything like little people. You know, I used to remember in pathology looking down through my microscope saying, hello, little guys down there, talking to the little cells. I mean, it makes them have a little personality. And then they say to you, after you've gone through a little bit, if somebody hears you doing that, they'll say, that's not right. These are more like machines. This is a molecular world. Get with it. Get with the cell walls. You know, realize that these are interacting enzymes. Okay, so you start moving that way, and I was doing good at that. I mean, I was getting like everything's a little machine churning along, doing each little cog, doing its little things, and neurons are doing their little things. And then all of a sudden you start reading nuclear physics. I got into that, I don't know, some psychotic evening. I got into reading, looking at theoretical physics. And when you start realizing that matter explodes, that it's an emergent property of energy fields, and when you tinker with those little patterns of energy, it goes poof and there isn't any more. It really blows your whole thought. I mean, if we don't have little building blocks, what have we got? And then on top of that, they say, all this stuff is connected. All this, whatever they're saying, energy, strong force fields, weak force fields, interdigitates. You know, the Heisenberg implies it, Copenhagen Agreement, or whatever interpretation, Bell's inequality theorem, all these things, saying all this stuff runs together. And all the mystics are sitting around grinning from the Orient, you know, all the people grinning through their eyes saying, we told you all along, you know, that you're going to do that. And here are ultimate physicists on one side are agreeing with these dumb mystics. Now, this goes against my grain as a, quote, mechanistic scientist. But you have to quote it. That's the way the game is going, and it's going to make us reorganize the conceptual frames that we've got. Unless some genius can come up with something to save us and get us back into the old mechanical world, we're going to move that way, and we're going to have to change our conceptual frames to go with it. I wish there was some way I could say there's, you know, that let's just go and act as if we're certain. I was sort of almost, I heard the ringing cry, and I said, go, Dr. Fletch, just do that. The only thing I'd caution about is that does screen out some information. The only thing I can say for uncertainty is it does leave some tolerance. And I think for physicians, this is particularly crucial to have tolerance. And I think it helps us to understand, after all, you wrote situational ethics, why can't I write situational reality? I mean, it's the same sort of thing. I think we have to have a tolerance, and I think for any physician studying the human condition, studying how the central nervous system programs information, we've got to keep a mind open to how they see the world. The way an individual sees the world, whether he's a physicist or a farmer watching the sun come up, and I still like to think it does come up and we don't go around, but nevertheless, either way, you can't say it's right and wrong. You look at how much data does this format include? How much information can you put in that conceptual format? And the second thing, I think this is a good way of understanding that particular individual's, it's sort of like a mental status on each of us to find out how we conceptualize ourselves and what we think of the world.
Well, thank you. The floor is open for anyone who would like to come up and make a statement to be developed by your panel, or to make a vigorous statement of your own, or ask questions of anyone. I see we have one question. Dr. Hunter.
Doctors Porterfield and Spradlin, I share Joe's enthusiasm for your book and was was electrified in reading it. You ducked around one of the problems that has worried me the most in my whole intellectual struggle, and that is the concept of determinacy when it comes to the individual human will, freedom of the will. And I find myself backed into a corner on this one, that if I believe what I believe most strongly about science and causality, I find myself over the barrel when it comes to my illusion. Is it an illusion that I can make up my mind to do something and that it is not determined? I would like to hear you two give us your thoughts on this problem.
This is one of those nightmares. You know, I thought I got over that when I left medical school when he was dean, that he wouldn't ask questions like that anymore. You know, I try to, and I want to make sure that I make this clear, in trying to track the history of conceptual frames, that you don't get yourself caught up in any one of them and decide that you really understand the world. And I don't understand the world any better. You know, it's kind of interesting seeing how different people have seen it. But I don't think I could take one of these and answer your question. You can also quickly duck it, and you can get into this sort of Wittgenstein type thing of, well, let's play some word games until one of us commits suicide. I think that's what he did after a long time of bantering about different ways of organizing information. You get into so many paradoxes. The old thing that we struggle with kids, you know, can God make a rock so big he can't lift it? But if he's all powerful, he certainly ought to be able to. And you start going around a little, well, if he's all powerful, can he make a rock so big he can't lift it type of thing? If I am part of the total continuum, then does that leave me any free will? Is what your question is. Again, the question, I think we have to get back to the situational thing of saying, if I am viewed as an individual unit, as we have to act as if, and as Dr. Fletcher said it so eloquently, if we have a social organization, we have to act as if we have free will and that we have some way of influencing our destiny. And certainly at levels of complexity as advanced as we are in the system on system on system type of organization, I would suspect that there's a servo-emergent thing. Now, you would say, was our decision biased? I'd say, yes, it certainly was. Your first grade teacher probably had something to do with it. The fact that you're here today might have been something to do with the first grade teacher. How many events went into you making that final decision? If we're grandiose enough to say, I just made it by myself, without looking at all the information that goes into making that particular yes-no decision, I think we kid ourselves. So at some time or another, the I, whatever that is, that pool of information that I use for self-referencing, can take credit for an action that I did. I cannot tell you whether I did it, whether I take credit as a rationalization or whether I innovatively made the move myself. And I doubt that there's anybody present that can. If somebody can, I would like to hear their views on it.
Jim?
Thanks. A couple of questions. One addressed to the issue of practical implications, because I am interested, as Joe is, in raising the question as whether there are any practical implications of this perspective. And I happen to think there are, but I'd like to ask our two spokespersons to spell those out. And one I'm particularly interested in is what the impact of the principle of uncertainty is on the doctor-patient relationship. How would a physician working with this conceptual frame approach the patient any differently than a physician working with the other? Would it mean an involvement of the patient in decision-making in a different way? Would it mean a different kind of disclosure of information? What's involved there? But while I have the floor, if I could just get the other one out on the table as well, which is more theoretical. And it has to do with the relation of religion and science, because in a way this book and the presentation today are attempts to overcome some of the dichotomies that have plagued us, a lot of them, including, I would say, in part the religion and science one. But the issue I want to raise is what happens to religion from this perspective. I think that on the one hand, one could say that if you take this perspective seriously, that it can be used as a test to rule out certain kinds of religious beliefs. It's difficult to take it seriously and defend belief in a personal God acting in history who's primarily concerned about human welfare. It's difficult, if one takes it seriously, to incorporate an understanding of consciousness persisting after death. and so forth. I mean, there would be a lot, I think, that would be called into question by, not only by the perspective itself, but by some things associated with it. On the other hand, it seems to give direction to certain other kinds of beliefs, those in a more mystical direction. It suggests kind of a union, holistic approach. But I'm wondering if the perspective itself doesn't become religion or religious, if it's not an alternative religion. And I guess it really with two terms that you employed. I think a religion has to do with the most comprehensive or ultimate ordering of our beliefs, and second, with some sense of awe and reverence. And toward the end of your book, you talk about a frame of reverence. At first, I thought it was a misprint. You meant frame of relevance or something, and I said, no, they really mean a frame of reverence. And I'm interested in the kind of religious connotations involved here, as well as the notion of the cosmic web and so forth, that really seem to me to be not simply a scientific vision, but a religious vision.
Will?
Well, this is one thing that I did appreciate when Patty and I were working together on this book, is as you start getting a feeling of the relativity of any conceptual frame, you can't say this one is good and this one is bad, this one is right and this one is wrong. It depends on the formats that you're using. What information are you putting in which conceptual frame? Now, people will say, well, one other side over there, that other side over there is artsy, craftsy type junk. And this over here is really science. Well, go back to some real sort of scientist like, let's say, Niels Bohr, and he says, well, don't talk about atoms, they're metaphors. So we're talking about, unless you can understand that this is an abstraction, that unless you can understand that what we're doing in all of our conceptual frames, whether it's art, science, religion, is organizing data in a certain sequential pattern that seems to make sense to us. You know, I think this is the key thing. We are really playing with a set of metaphors. We can kid ourselves, and most of them happen to be tautologic. We just go around and say the same thing with another set of words and say, hi, we got closure on that one, just like I tried to. He looked at me and said, I'll let you go this time. Hunter, on this one. You know, you don't answer questions like that. You go around in little circles and make a lot of verbal, you know, sort of verbal gymnastics, emotional or limbic exercises, if you want to call it that way. But you don't really come up with the answers. Now, the frame of reverence that we're talking about, the ways of organizing information, there are multiple ways of doing that. I would have a little concern, I guess, if somebody said, my metaphors are better than anybody else's in the world for everybody. They can say it, my metaphors suit me better than any other that I have read, and I'll say, great, why don't you hang with it? I don't care how anthropomorphic, how mechanistic, how... I kind of believe in dragons, if you really want to know the truth. I think they were cute little beings that we let go. I realize that these are metaphors, but, you know, it's nice to have them around in your fantasy type of thing, if you read Tolkien, that sort of thing. Same thing, I'm not making light of some of the ways that metaphors are used in religious sequences. Some of them, I think, if you put them out and you say, I'm going to take this set of metaphors and put it in a scientific logic course, it'll fall on its head. If you say, I want to do this to see the emotional state that's generated, how to do a digital to analog gestalt to make people feel reverence, accepted, a part of whatever whole they want to be, then I don't think we can throw rocks at any kind of religious orientation. And I think this, I'll try to not be so long-winded, but I think it has the same thing to do with the doctor-patient relationship. I don't think any of us can say that person is totally wrong in their particular little worldview. We have to, as physicians, see what their worldview is and have a little bit of respect for that. I think the relativity of reality, or this sense of relativity, does give a tolerance, not only for different ways of organizing information, science, religion, art, that sort of thing, but to the way different people put their world together. And that would be my clumsy way of answering this.
Well, let me ask you this question. We have a real patient here. You can choose the malady or complaint. Jim has asked you what difference your new relativistic conceptual framework makes for the physician who has the task of establishing a sound diagnosis and a reliable treatment plan. Now, what given this is where it might make a difference?
He don't let up on that one. I thought I snowed him on that one on the first time around. But if you ever noticed, if you go out and you take a group of people that will take information from, if I sit down and interview you, and then I have each one of the panel take you in a dark room and interview you, and we all write it up, and then we flash each other with it. Do you think we'd all get the same data? If you're the same person, why shouldn't we? I mean, this is science now. We're in medicine. Trust us, we're doctors, right? I think we have to be aware that we participate, perhaps at levels of complexity like the human animal. There's so many variables, as I mentioned before, that you expect that kind of variability on a thing, but all of us participate in the history. We're not objective. I am involved, you know, with my admiration for your book and a few other things. I'd probably take a different history because of that attitude. We both participate in your history. I would have trouble saying this fairly ancient dirt ball came in and asked me to. Nobody laughed at that one, but I did. Some of the people, you just couldn't think that about Joe. I mean, it would be a very difficult. I'm already biased as a Senate reverence on a thing, and when I say it, I go home and feel ashamed even today for having said it up here in a state of high excitement. But that's a bias. If I'm biased the other way, I have heard that said in the emergency room about older guys that came in dirty and upset, and they're just the same type of person if you want to talk to them about the information that brings them to the hospital. Am I making any sense? I think there's a great deal of difference, and I think us appreciating that we don't have the solid information base that we kid ourselves that we do when we take histories. Maybe even some of our laboratories have a little variability in them, but certainly the interpersonal relationships have a lot of variability. There's a lot of relativity in the information that comes in. We help create it, just like in the subject-object dichotomy that we pride ourselves in. I think is kind of an illusion, particularly in medicine. I think we are a participatory person.
Mr. Gomez?
My name is Carlos Gomez. I'm a second-year medical student. During the course of the discussion this afternoon, a fellow that I used to work with, Julian Hart, his name kept coming up for a variety of reasons. But one was, when he used to be in discussions like this, when it came time to critique, he used to say, well, I'm from the Department of Warts, and I'm going to throw some warts into the conversation. That's what I'm going to do. I have to say I don't like the thrust of the discussion for a variety of reasons. One is I'm not overwhelmed by it because I don't think it's original. I think that this question of frames of reference, the search for certainty, I think it is part of the human condition. I think it's things that philosophers as early as Augustine and long before Augustine have already said. And in restating the fact that we live in uncertain times, that the human condition is uncertain, doesn't add anything to the debate, which brings me to the second point, which is, if I accept what you're saying, and I'm struggling hard not to, where does it leave us? What I get from this sort of debate, this sort of talk, is a very solitary, lonely, solipsistic world where there's basically no common language between people, where your frame of reference is equally as valid as mine, is equally as valid as a psychotic sitting over in the corner, and there is no common language, there is no common set of values that we can use to judge things, to say this is better than this is less good than something else. And it strikes me as a very destructive, very unhelpful way of looking not only at medicine, but at philosophy, at society in general.
Could I ask Carlos, while you're here, aren't you getting at really sort of what the theater of the absurd was getting at in terms of the relationship between man and the inability to understand why he was here? Aren't you really getting at the issue of self-awareness and having that self-awareness, and in that sense being alienated from what the world, how you actually find the world and how you actually find death? Is this what you're really sort of getting at? Is the same thing that the people that wrote the plays in the theater of the absurd are getting at?
Are we all waiting for Godot? Is that what you're asking me?
Right.
No.
All right.
No, I said exactly what I meant, that I'm very uncomfortable with the notion of floating frames of reference when they're applied to ethical issues. I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that something which a physicist made note of in seeing an atomic particle or not seeing an atomic particle can be applied to everyday life. I think it gives us license to do, or in a general sense, it gives people license to do things that normally they wouldn't do.
Which one of you would like to answer that question first? Will?
Well, you said what I said in the book. I don't recall what I said. We traced what a lot of other people said, and so I can say, if I wanted to dodge it, I'd say, which particular author did you have your most difficulty with? You know, we also traced a third of the book, a fairly anthropomorphic and then a fairly mechanistic type worldview, and I still see those as being quite relevant and quite with us and available for anybody that finds them productive. You know, I still like to go out and talk to squirrels and things when nobody's watching, and my Thorazine level gets low and things like that. I don't see anything wrong with using different formats, and if it's comforting for you to say, I like a nice mechanistic cause and effect sequence, that fits my style of organizing data, I'd say do it. You know, and my father, who's a farmer, likes to see the sun come up in the east and go down in the west, and says all this stuff about it spinning around is a bunch of crap, would all fall off. I'd say, it's a good idea. You better stay in the middle of your farm. Don't get close to the edge on a thing. But I don't see any evangelical reason for making people move to one or the other. I'm just trying to track, we were trying to track in our things, different conceptual frames that are emerging. And I'm not trying to convert anybody to one or another frame.
Joe, would you like to comment further on that?
Here we've got a comment coming up.
Well, I think he's going to something different.
Oh, I see. I wonder whether Doctors Spradlin and Porterfield would accept something suggested by one of Jim's questions. Are you willing, given such language as you used in the book, a frame of reverence and so on, willing to acknowledge that though you might not be formalistically religious, you are mystically religious?
You got that from reading the book that I'm...
No, I got that from Jim Jones.
You can't cheat on the side, Joe. We have to give it to that. No, I can't rule out any frame. I like to yo-yo between them all, and I think a frame of reverence, some raison d'etre, regardless, it may yo-yo. I could be a religious fanatic. I've always tried to be one. I just can't find the right place to get it on. I really think that's a very necessary thing, to have some area that's sacred. And so if you're asking about religion, I think that's a very important part of the human phenomenon. I say that as a psychiatrist, I say it personally. I have no apology for that. I wouldn't get into a theologic argument as to which one is better, though. I'm not going to get into, which religious format, which frame of reverence is the true one. I wouldn't pick up.
Frank? It's Dr. Brochu.
You're waiting for Godot. I want to talk about Gödel. It seems to me Gödel's theorem says that you cannot prove a system from within the system, which is essentially what I've heard here. And I really want to congratulate that student because he spoke for several people, I think. Given Gödel's proof, and given the complexity of what we do and the amazing processes that go on, does there not have to be some superior being outside of our system, or superior beings of which we are atoms? I think you mentioned that. Doesn't there have to be something to believe in that's greater than the human race? Somebody must understand this, and I don't see how it's possible for us to prove from inside who we are, what we are.
Why must somebody understand this?
Well, it's a subject.
Wait a minute.
Don't go away.
Have to be on record.
That's right, you raised the question.
Hold that right up there.
I think they have shown, and it's fairly obvious, I think, that this is a very finely tuned, complex system. There's a lot of interaction. There are a lot of things going on that relate one to another. There are chains of events. I think in a practical sense you might be able to say that. And given that that happened, it seems to me, just purely by belief, I suppose, that it's very unlikely that happened by chance. That there is a way, that there is some understanding, not necessarily a creator, but that there is a way to understand this system, yet from within the system, perhaps it's impossible for us to do it, and we're wasting a lot of time if we try to do it.
by that you mean understanding in kind of ultimate sense rather than understanding the bits and pieces necessary
Yes,
for
in the sense
life
that
and action.
the search for certainty.
Well, one of the theses that I would push is, again, when given numbers of options, I guess we have the option of taking that seems most practical to us. If you'd say, I can believe this, I really believe it, I don't think you'd find much in an argument. But if you say, are you certain of this, positive, certain of this, you might say yes or no, and a lot of people might say, well, I'm certain of something else. And of course, we can kill each other, and we have done that in several thousand years of killing each other because we were certain of which way the deity looked or how many of them there were. So we have to be a little careful about moving metaphors to the place where the certainty of a metaphor draws us into fairly disastrous type of activity. I mean, on a practical basis where we're fighting, killing for a principle, a cause, I think we have to do the situational ethics thing. And I disagree with the young gentleman that doesn't like situational ethics. I think it's the only sane way that we're going to address a relative world is with relative ethics, taking all the data we can get into consideration. I don't think we can turn down and throw some data out and say, I won't believe this because it doesn't, I can't make it fit. We just have to say it doesn't fit.
But a computer or mathematical proof that it's unprovable is a very valuable thing. And I wonder if Codell didn't do that for us. That's all I should do.
Thank you, Frank. John? It's John, stage name.
I'd just like to follow up. Last night I saw on television a show that many of you might have seen, A History of War. And the bottom line, at least as I understood it, was that wars were inherently ridiculous, fought over nonsensical issues with thousands and millions of people being killed. Well, we're in a position right now where I think one thing's certain, that with atomic weapons we can do some pretty bad things to all of mankind, including this planet. But we now come down to what was not said in last night's television show. Nothing was said about Adolf Hitler, what he was doing to various people. There was nothing to do with specific issues over which at least some of the wars of my lifetime seem to have been fought. We've got a very big problem now. We've got some very serious moral and ethical concerns. We have a free country. We're worried about another situation elsewhere that seems to be growing. And I think this is about the most critical thing. I sort of support what the medical students said. Are we going to stand on principles? Are we going to look at what we think and believe that freedom is really important and worth doing something about? Or are we really now reduced, particularly with the consequences, to saying that nothing's important and that it's better to live and to just keep going and let things roll along as they're going to? Or do we stand up and do what we believe is right?
John, I'd love to say that all of us should get a banner and go out and kill for Christ. I like those kind of statements. You know, the Prince of Peace deserves to be killed for, right? You know, we got to have some principles, and we go to God, and if it's worth dying for, we can kill people for. Now, up to a point, I suppose that we have lived on that sort of thing. The thing that I've got out of tracing some of these things is making sure that we've got all the information before we march out, and making sure that we have enough tolerance to try to negotiate before we do that. I'm afraid that we narrow our filters down and say, them words is fighting words. I'm ready to go to war with a very small amount of information on the thing. But then, you know, I don't know the answer to your question of where do you set those little boundaries that says beyond this, we kill, pillage, or do whatever.
Neil?
I liked your book, but he's my chairman, so I need to say this.
Get his name down.
It seems like there's something very threatening about looking at the absolute fundamental nature of the universe and seeing chaos. But I'm struck by the fact that if you look closely enough at a table, you perceive chaos, or we perceive chaos. But if you take a step back, you're still able to see it as a table. And it just seems like, you know, to say that they're suggesting that a psychotic has, you know, as valid a view of the world as all the rest of us, maybe in a philosophical sense, you know, is interesting and relevant, but in a practical sense, I don't think that they're saying that that is the way we should conduct ourselves. So I don't.
Neil, thank you. I think that's going to be the last word. We've used up the time, and we usually do, and as usual, we are left with a fair number of questions yet, and that's good. And I hope you all will continue to discuss the issues with each other and with the panelists. Thank you very much.